Um, well, I've been in Second Life for about 7 years now, and I've had the museum for about 6 years. Actually, it's the 6 year my anniversary, and I have the Middle Passage experience, and actually, the history of Southern African Americans in America, and that historical context. Um, as far as the virtual relationships go, when I came to Second Life, I looked at it as one would look at a alternate universe and an opportunity for me to take a road less traveled or a road not traveled. So in relationships here, it was something that I wanted to do some experimentation with, just like you did, and wondering what my life would be like if I had taken a different path. So I have, and I know the conversation will go on and we'll add more, but I've had some significant experiences in here, and I have to tell you, I have learned a lot from these special relationships that we have in here. Absolutely. And I'm going to pass the mic back to you because I'm sorry I took up so much time. I always seem to have a problem with in-roll voice, so I hope everyone hears me okay.
Yep, I hear you.
I just wanted to get across to everyone that I do have a historical museum here, and I'd like for people to come out and take a look at some of the things that we have there, and using my art as a medium and as a voice. But Acuminous, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Absolutely, and we'll give you an opportunity to share ways for people to find you as well as we end the show. But Jana or LouRei, do you all want to jump in and just kind of share what your thoughts are about some of these experiences or people who you've encountered who've had these experiences in world?
This is Jana. I've actually had more traditional relationships in Second Life. But, you see the poly lifestyle, where there may be 4 or 5 women with one man or vice versa. The thing that got me, and I realized recently, because we did a little segment on it, the furry contingent in Second Life. But there's actually a furry contingent in real life. They had a conference recently.
Absolutely, yep.
So, it's just different things like that. And, I think that can be the great thing about Second Life. You get to explore, possibilities and things that, like you said, you wouldn't do in real life. But yeah, it's interesting just to watch the dynamics in Second Life.
Absolutely. And what about you, LouRei?
I've seen it all. There's not much I haven't seen nor heard. And it depends on, where you want to take this conversation, because there's not much I haven't seen or heard.
Well, we can take the conversation anywhere, but, what I'm interested in, or what I think would be useful, is just what your thoughts are about that, about the things that you've seen, because I'm with you. It'll be 8 years for me next month. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But, and there are lots of things have been made available now that weren't available, 7 years ago, because, as people come, their creativity expands, and, you get a full run when you're in world. But just what your thoughts are about the kinds of things that you've experienced or seen in relationships.
It can happen. And I'm just open to a lot of different things. I don't really have, an opinion one way or the other. I just, do what makes you happy.
And I think that's a good point. And, kind of my thought as I asked the question, because I believe a lot of the shame that comes from not being willing to explore things in your first life, but then enjoying the opportunity to have a fantasy come to life in world, is this idea of judgment. And I think that the experience of power is really grounded in this idea of judgment and what other people think or believe about who you are or what you do or how you do it and that kind of thing. And we just can't escape that because socially, we're sort of told that, women are supposed to do or be this, that, or the other, and men are supposed to do or be this, that, or the other. So, in Second Life, for example, we have an opportunity to step out of those roles. I know people who are female in their real life and they come in world as men and vice versa. It really gives you an opportunity to explore those roles and to come up with some new self-judgments, not necessarily to judge others. I think it's always a good idea to be open, because if it's not your life, then it's, you don't have to endure any of the consequences or even the benefits that come from whatever it is they're doing. But you might learn something about yourself when you explore how you feel about what you see. So, in line with this thinking of, judgments and power and relationships, what are your thoughts about gender roles? Jana was saying that she's seen the furries around, and I have too. And there are, I saw somebody with a bumper sticker just in my neighborhood here in Virginia. We in the South, but I saw somebody with a furry, a pro furry bumper sticker here, which really just kind of took me back. I was like, wow, But then on top of that, then I knew what it was. I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is. So just what are your thoughts about gender roles and their relevance in relationships now? Is it important that women stay in aprons in the bedroom?
You know what? I think that you can do almost anything in Second Life, and that's the great thing about it. When we were talking about your own fantasy, and you coming here to fulfill the fantasy, and as a visual artist, is one thing that I do understand is that whatever your eyes take in and whatever the brain takes in as in a reality, it actually perceives it. I mean, you probably know more about this, Acuminous, than I do, but your body actually responds to things as though it's real.
Absolutely.
So if you want to take this opportunity to be a male or a male to be a female and try to experience some of the things that a female through the eyes of a female would be, or even another race or even another species like a furry, when your eyes take in something and send that message to the brain, you're actually living that. And that's one of the marvelous things about Second Life. But the thing that I think most people probably need to remember, and I have to remind myself all the time, sometimes I have to step back and say, this is a computer. I'm sitting at a computer. Okay, because sometimes your experiences can become so real that it can be harmful. So we have to remember, I think, to keep a balance with that. I have a friend that says, always remember that this is a game, and I always remember that it's not a game. And so it's a duality here that few will understand unless you're actually in this virtual reality realm.
I had to put that one in local. We have to remember this is a game, but it's not a game. Absolutely. And I think you made some excellent points relative to how people interpret things in the brain. And you're right, I'm not going to get psychology deep on you guys. I don't want to turn this into, a clinical staffing. I'm not at work today. But you're right, our brain really does take in the information, and it doesn't label it real or not real. It just labels it as an experience. And so you can generate those same types of feelings. And that's another, component to this discussion today, because if you aren't aware of what you are exposing yourself to, it could very easily turn into an abusive situation. And, that's sort of something that I know that as a healer, someone who's made themselves available to sort of consult with people when they're struggling with the experiences they have in worlds, that I see a lot. I see a lot of people who are very confused about what's happening to them and how it's impacting their first life, because they have not allowed themselves to sort of separate out the experiences they are allowing and creating for themselves in their fantasy life. And they struggle when they log off with the feelings and emotions that are still very real. So, just kind of going around, LouRei, and what are your thoughts about this idea of gender roles and us sort of functioning in a fantasy space as women or as men, and because there are people who say I'm not going to be the apron wearing wife, but then there are people who do.
Well, I'm never going to be an apron wearing wife. That's never going to happen in my fantasy or in my real.
I think that
Let me tell you why I see it as weakness, because I feel like that you like we have a tendency to define ourselves by the way people perceive us, and part of that perception is the way people view you. And wearing an apron for me is a sign of weakness because of what that apron represents. And that's why I feel that it's because that's not the way I want to be perceived. And I agree with what you said, that this is a game and it is some people it's real at the same time, but in my fantasy and the way I was raised, and because we're inevitable in here, our opinions, the way we feel about things, the way we see things, and for me, that in my real, wearing an apron is a sign of weakness, because I'll never put myself in this box. Like, I just feel like wearing an apron is putting yourself in a box, and that's something I'll never do.
Okay, I understand that kind of what she's saying is that it's putting her in a submissive role, because traditionally a person wearing an apron is a servant, is a submissive person, a person who caters and tends to others. And, you see a person in an apron in a restaurant, you see a person in an apron in a butcher shop. This is a person who serves you. Your grandmother wore an apron. She was probably subservient to your grandfather. So you're looking at it as a symbol of something. But also on the other side of the coin, you look at a person wearing an apron like Martha Stewart and some of the other people that have made it a multi-billion-dollar business, being a genius in domestic sciences. But an apron doesn't necessarily equate to domesticity. In every painting that I've done, I primarily put the woman in an apron because that was the costume of the period. But don't be fooled, because these were very powerful women. And I'm talking culturally, because that's what I know. That's my area of expertise. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a position of weakness, but if you're looking at it as a symbol of submission, I can see where you're coming from. I mean, I wouldn't be put in a box either. I never have been. I'm a pretty successful businesswoman in real life. So to look at it as far as marketing and selling my art and becoming a successful artist, because you don't find many people who can actually live off of their art. That's a skill. So I understand that. But at the same time, I have great admiration for women who wear those aprons, and like my grandmother, who was the inspiration behind what I make my money on in my artwork. So I understand both sides of that. And
But don't get me wrong, I'm not. I mean, for me, this is for me. My grandmother in real was wore that apron, and she was a submissive. She got up at 5 o'clock every morning, made sure everybody had breakfast. She made sure my grandfather's clothes were ironed. But for me, that doesn't work for me.
I love you, grandmother. I think that's
Welcome back, Kinte.
What's the big problem with that? Your grandfather was happy, she was happy.
Speaking of grandmothers, my grandmother was the same.
Can you answer that question, please?
Me?
Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sure my grandfather was very happy, but my grandfather also had a side chick too, and it broke her heart.
Oh, why we gotta to bring up the side chick.
See.
Hey,
She did
women,
everything she could for him,
women with corporate
and
positions,
still it was
women with
not
corporate
enough.
positions have husbands that have side chicks. Wearing an apron has nothing to do with your man
That's
having a
true.
side chick. Okay.
Well,
Very
I don't know
true.
those
What were you
people.
saying,
I just
Jana?
Your grandfather went through a lot back in the day, and them side chicks helped them do from going.
Oh my
No,
gosh.
no.
Right.
We're
So
not, there's not
again,
supposed to be any men in this discussion.
and we,
Where's that
and
view coming from?
I'm glad that Kinte was able to make it back because, I think that having his perspective is valuable and is going to allow us to, to sort of give more depth to the perspectives that we're discussing. But I did want to hear the point that Jana was trying to make.
What I was saying is my grandmother was the same. She never worked a day in her life outside the home. She took care of the home, made sure everybody was fed, clothed, clean. However, she made every decision, every major decision that family had to make. So that's why I said there is power behind the apron. My grandfather didn't make individual decisions about what the family was going to do without her significant input, and she could overrule him. She was the president, the undercover president. So that's why I say, hey, if you can take care of me, you can give me an apron. I'll wear it.
Right. And Lyric was saying, I saw that she said she sees an apron as a way to keep your clothes from getting dirty while you're cooking. Well, which is true.
Exactly, which is basically what it's for. Because I wear an apron in what I do. I always wear an apron. And I wear an apron to keep paint off my clothes. Although paint gets on my clothes anyway, I still have that painter's apron on. So, apron is you're right, it's a utilitarian piece of clothing that you put on. But I think Lou was looking at it symbolically, saying that people wear aprons, barefoot and pregnant, in the kitchen, no say so, you subservient. The man is, what is it to say? The man is the one that makes all the decisions, and he's the head of the house, and you have to defer to him. And I think she's looking at it in that context. And in that context, I have to agree with Lou 100%. Well,
Emuna,
you getting on the subject. I'm sorry. I just want to say this real quick. See, my grandmother was my daycare, and I learned so much from her. And the path of spirituality that I have chosen in life came from her. The wisdom that I learned from her has been invaluable. From metaphysics to understanding the ways of the universe. This was a very intelligent, wise woman who did everything. And, doing all of this is no easy job. I'm not putting it down, at all. I admire him and I give him credit all day long.
Emuna, go ahead, girl.
Thank you. I think that when it comes to people of color, sometimes we relate, being submissive to slavery. And that's one thing that I think that people need to, break that up, because it's just not the same. As a person that wears the apron in my relationships, I choose if I want to wear something underneath that apron, or maybe tie his hands to the bedpost with that apron, so that it's not just the same thing that it did back in the day. I'm the one that takes care of my children, cooks their meals, irons the clothes, and I'm an executive. But I love doing that for my family. And it takes a strong person to submit to the right person. There's a lot of strength in that. It's not weakness.
I agree.
And I do want to, let me just kind of jump in now and just make a couple of comments myself. And I think that you all have done a really good job of, putting together a nice bridge here. And that is that, first of all, it's less important what the symbolic item is. As Indea was saying, the apron symbolizes a lot of things. And that's probably the point that Lou was making, that it has a very significant meaning for her. And the meaning that it has for her sort of gives her a sense of aversion to the idea of the apron in general. But I also think that whether you look at it symbolically or not, the most important thing is how you interpret your role. Because trying to be something that you aren't is a surefire way to, create more challenges challenges in your relationships than you really need. We all sort of wear a mask when we're first interacting with people because we don't know who they are or what it is they need from us or what we can provide for them. So, to that degree, I totally get it. But when you get more deeply involved with a person in any capacity, it's important that they're able to see you for who you really are, because otherwise, they are relating and connecting with something that's not really you. So, for me, wearing an apron, it's a way I keep stuff off my clothes when I'm cooking. I was talking about my kids earlier running around here for Valentine's Day, so I do that whole thing. I also am very committed to my professional work because I love people and I love to see people in healthy relationships that allow them to grow spiritually. So I'm committed to both sides of that in my life. The other piece, though, is Emuna was talking about this idea of submission. And can you all still hear me? Okay, just wanted to make sure. All right, so this idea of submission in relationships, we actually started to talk about this during our last discussion on Mondays. Our discussions are usually Monday nights at 6 p.m. And we were talking about this idea of roles in relationships, and especially male-female relationships, traditional relationships. In that traditional sense. Now, this is my opinion, but I think it's important because that is what will bring balance to the relationship. And sometimes because of this power idea we have that if we give in to the relationship, somehow that makes us weak. Submission being seen as a weakness, and that you aren't standing up for yourself in relationships. But in order for two people to come together in a way that they can build something, they both have to be willing to submit to some degree. However, in most relationships these days, women, and it took us a long time to get here because, the things that were going on at the time of grandma and great grandma, we don't see a lot of those things in the same framework now. We have a lot more opportunity to do things than maybe were available at that time. So, because we have these options, there's this idea that if we somehow continue to give in to this idea of being a homemaker, we are neglecting this empowerment that's available to us. And I disagree with that. I really do think that you can have it all if you're able to balance it in your relationship. If you're trying to be everything in your relationship and you're not even willing to allow, your partner to assume part of the responsibility of leading your household, then it becomes overwhelming. Nobody can do everything. So I think sometimes people struggle with that. Okay, yeah, I can see why it'd be helpful, but on the other hand, I don't want him to think that, I can't do all right without him. What your thoughts are about why women in these relationships where they are feeling like, I can't really submit to the guy. I always have to feel like, I could leave at any time. Why that happens, and whether or not you feel that that's a healthy approach to a relationship or not. Why don't we start with you, Jana?
I think part of that is you are trying to preserve yourself. If you have a false sense of, if you submit, that you lose part of yourself. I think that's a big reason why women do that. And plus, things have changed so much, like you said, over the years, that, hey, you may have a job that pays more than him, so, you don't feel like you should have to submit to anyone.
Yeah.
And, submission, though, like Emuna said, it's a really deep area to delve into. And when I'm thinking of this, I hope my sister's not listening, but I'm thinking about my real life sister. She is a powerhouse. However, she has never been married. She's never had any really long-term relationships because she refuses to submit at all. It has to be her way or no way. And like you said, to have a successful relationship, you have to give. He has to give. There cannot be, unless that's the way you set it up, where one person has 100% of the power in a relationship.
I want to say something about that before we move on. And I think that no relationship can be successful if one person has 100%. Even in, alternative relationships, Emuna was talking about vanilla versus BDSM or whatever. Those are labels for roles, in my opinion. I think that it always has to be 50-50. And it sounds cliche, but it's really true. Even in those power exchange relationships, a person cannot be a dominant unless there is a submissive. He or she cannot dominate if there isn't someone to submit. And a submissive cannot be submissive or cannot submit unless there is someone to dominate. They need each other. Otherwise, they're just an individual. They don't, they can't even step into that role or even assume that sense of power. So I think that it's important that there be clear expectations about who does what. And maybe that's sort of what you're getting at, Jana. You can tell me if I'm wrong. Because in my household, I'll be transparent and say when I'm home with my kids and my family, I am mom and wife. And I have no shame in my game about that. I have no problem with allowing people to understand the role my husband has in our household, because it's important to me that he understand how powerful and important he is for us. However, I don't always do the dishes. Sometimes he does them. And, that's something that we worked out together and works for us in our relationship. He doesn't see it as, making him any weaker. I don't see that as making me any stronger. It's just something that we have agreed upon in our relationship and works for us. So I think that it is important that you set clear expectations about who does what and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But it's absolutely important that you're both giving 50% and you're receiving 50%.